Hello everyone and welcome to the CyberWire's Research Saturday, presented by the Hewlett Foundation's Cyber Initiative. I'm Dave Bittner, and this is our weekly conversation with researchers and analysts tracking down threats and vulnerabilities and solving some of the hard problems of protecting ourselves in a rapidly evolving cyberspace. Thanks for joining us. And now a moment to tell you about our sponsor, the Hewlett Foundation's Cyber Initiative. While government and industry focus on the latest cyber threats, we still need more institutions and individuals who take a longer view. They're the people who are helping to create the norms and policies that will keep us all safe in cyberspace. The Cyber Initiative supports a cyber policy field that offers thoughtful solutions to complex challenges for the benefit of societies around the world. Learn more at hewlett.org/cyber.
We discovered the campaigns in 2017 in its final form.
That's Limor Kessem, an executive security advisor with IBM Security. She returns to Research Saturday to describe IcedID, a banking trojan that she and the IBM X-Force research team have been tracking.
We actually knew there was module development underway as early as June 2017, and some stuff was added in July. And a lot of times we kind of wait to see, okay, what is this thing? What is it going to be? And are we going to see it in activity? So we just follow it and check when it goes into live mode. So I guess we could start with the overall picture of financial cybercrime. Just a few words about, the criminals nowadays manage to carry out very high sum fraudulent transactions using these banking trojans like IcedID and other similar codes. And losses from these types of financial cybercrime are estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars a year. They affect the financial industry, but they also target any other service that carries that kind of value, like monetary value. So online payments, anything like loyalty cards, and cryptocurrency has been also one of their favorites lately. If we look at the overall picture of these types of trojans, if I look at the decade of specializing in this domain, I can tell you that while it has been an ongoing escalation over the years, we have been seeing a shift started 2014, where these trojans have become very much the business of organized crime. So that means that when we find new malware like this, it's most often part of a business-like organization, and it's part of a bigger picture for cybercrime. So aside from the code that is very modular and sophisticated, we're going to talk about it in a minute, it's part of an overall operation, which includes different internal teams that do operational security. They do online theft and social engineering. They have money movers. They have collaborators, both in other crime groups and people they bribe, insiders in banks sometimes, who launder and mobilize the stolen funds for them. So if you're thinking, okay, what kind of amounts do these people manage to move per transaction? They can move millions of dollars at a time. Tens of millions sometimes. It's very it varies by the group, but this is definitely not people who are in it for small change and smaller transaction. And this arena has few long-standing players with some moving parts. I call them moving parts, which are groups that come and go. And in today's security and law enforcement landscape, it cannot be taken for granted that a group like that will actually survive. Seeing new groups in the cybercrime arena is always considered an event that attracts a lot of attention, because everybody knows it will inevitably affect the financial sector in the target countries. And it doesn't happen a lot. We might see maybe one or two actual new codes a year. Sometimes we don't see any. But this is where IcedID comes in. So for 2017, it was one of two codes. The other one that was discovered was already an existing code base. And like you said, we discovered it around September, seen some stuff happening a little before that. And the first thing we noted upon analyzing it was its delivery method. The delivery method came by the Emotet Trojan, which was a significant observation for us.
Take us through that. Can you describe to us how Emotet works?
Yeah, so Emotet actually used to be a banking Trojan. It shares the exact same code base. It's called the Bugat code base that Drydex has. And Drydex is one of the most developed banking Trojans nowadays. This malware somewhere 2014-15 stopped stealing money itself and switched over to helping others do it. So we believe there's a small group operating it and serving cyber criminals mostly in Eastern Europe. And what they do is hold a botnet through which they deliver other malware for their customers. And their distribution is very targeted. They focus on businesses, and they use Emotet with a network propagation module, an email theft module. They get a lot of information. They do data exfiltration. They get to as many users as possible once they get on an enterprise endpoint. So this was the choice of IcedID and kind of starting to distribute the malware, which was telling in terms of target types. So it's going after businesses, particularly in the US, and Emotet works a lot in the US. That's their turf. And we also learned that these are the kind of collaborators they have. So old timers from the cybercrime arena, there's no amateurs here. We know that, this kind of connection already knows what's going to come next. For us, this kind of builds the picture for us.
So Emotet is the delivery mechanism, and it's correct that the initial infection usually comes via spam?
Yeah. So, a lot of Trojans nowadays, if not all of them pretty much, have a multi-stage infection routine. So they're not going to come straight forward and be downloaded from somewhere. There's going to be many stages. Emotet itself is going to be, delivered through spam. There's going to be probably a poisoned Word document with malicious macros. There's going to be a PowerShell script that's going to run. Eventually, it's going to be a loader. Then there's going to be the Emotet Trojan. And Emotet, once it grabs hold of the endpoint, it becomes like sort of a backdoor. It can then usher in other malware at this. So it could be IcedID, but it also works with CACBot. It also works with Zeus Panda and very recent campaigns. So we're seeing it kind of switching up the drops of different malware. And IcedID itself just recently moved on to the Handsitter downloader, which is another group that distributes malware through their own loader or malware type thing.
So there's a sort of a modularity that's going on here with some of these things, where people can swap in and out different components depending on, I guess, what's working and what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and also banking Trojans will bring in a certain module based on information they got from the endpoint. They could say, okay, well, if this endpoint is an enterprise endpoint, then I might want to launch the email theft module because I can do XYZ. We saw that a lot with a previous Trojan called Shifu that actually had modules for stealing from point of sales machines. So it will fetch that module only when it was on a point of sale machine, which was that kind of thing. Or if it, detected other types of valuable information it could get, it would launch different modules accordingly, or not launch them. Sometimes they choose not to do that. So
Emotet serves up IcedID on your machine. Take us through what happens next.
From that time that it tries to fetch it, the malware comes with a cryptor. So a cryptor just keeps it kind of boxed in, so it's like a gift that you don't know what's in it. Unfortunately, not a good one. And we noticed that IcedID had its own cryptor. So nothing that's being used already in the wild, not a commercial cryptor that could be bought from someone, which means it was specifically designed for IcedID, which is something that would happen for privately owned malware. So that was another telling sign of, hey, this is not just a run-of-the-mill or a reuse of code. And then we noticed, the code grade has modularity, same capabilities we see for other banking Trojans. So it's like that Swiss knife, like we're saying, with the different modules here. What we saw is that they could do web injections, and it can do redirection attacks, and it can move users to a phishing page, initiate a VNC session, so it could take remote control of the endpoint. And we're seeing it basically setting up shop on the endpoint. And in setting up shop, it wants to know what the user is doing, where they're browsing to, in order to define if the user is going to a bank that interests them or to another target that interests them. In order to monitor the user's browsing, the malware sets up a local proxy on the machine. It sends the traffic first to localhost, the IP is 127.0.0.1, and then to a private TCP port 49157, just, I guess, randomly chose one of the private TCP ports, and it tunnels all the traffic through there. Now, there's different ways to do this. This is one way, just to kind of eavesdrop on the traffic that goes through the endpoint through the user. Mm-hmm. And that way the Trojan can actually tell, okay, they're going to bank 123 and I'm going to go into action now. And this concept is already being used by another Trojan called the Rootkit Trojan, which is another gang-owned malware. But not many Trojans use the proxy thing. This is pretty much, I guess, the two that are, I'll call them mainstream, that we see now that use it. But the proxy is not an end-all in this case, because IcedID also needs to do stuff when it wants to manipulate what the user is seeing. So it does hook the browser, the internet browser, to control what's being displayed, or if it has to do a redirection and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that in the process of doing this, the user doesn't see anything unusual up in their browser bar.
Correct. There is a special redirection that's a malware-enabled redirection that takes place here. Usually a redirection, if you go to a website, you could be redirected to another website, and it happens legitimately sometimes, an ad could redirect you somewhere or whatever. It's something normal, but you will see that changes. You'll see that you move to another page. You will see that the URL changed or whatever different changes took place. In this case, the victim is actually hijacked to a completely different website that's hosted by the criminals on their infrastructure. They don't see any changes. They believe they're still on their original bank's webpage. They'll be seeing the same URL. They'll be seeing the same certificate. Everything is going to look exactly the same, except they're on a replica. And at that point, they might be asked, it might look like a phishing page where they're asked to enter all kinds of different details, their payment card information. They're going to be asked for their usual login information, maybe an extra field or two. The Trojan will steal that information immediately in real time. And the criminal might decide to use it at that point or use it later, depending on how much they need the user to be engaged at that point, the victim to be engaged online.
So in terms of communications with the command and control servers, what are you seeing there?
So the communication with the command and control servers, of course, something that happens, for every malware. They need to communicate the information and exfiltrate data all the time. This malware communicates over an encrypted SSL, basically wants to keep the data out of sight from automated scans by the intrusion detection systems. It's a way for it just to be a tad more secure, because IcedID doesn't have a lot of anti-research or anti-security modules or features yet. It could probably build them later on, like other malware does gradually over time. For now, it doesn't have anything major, so this could be one of the only little protections it has right now. And it also uses this type of communication to reach out to a remote injection panel, which is a way for the malware operator during the transaction or during the session, the fake session that they have. They might want to deliver specific pages to the user seamlessly. So they fetch it from what's called a remote injection panel and orchestrate the flow of events from there. So they're using that as well to kind of keep that communication under wraps.
So just so I understand here, the possibility is that, well, if I'm the victim of this and I'm logged into what I think is my bank, but I've actually been redirected to one of these imitation sites, is someone monitoring that in real time and being able to put up custom things they want to get from me in real time, or is it automated, or both?
They could do both. Yeah. They could do both. They can have some custom things, like from the transaction panel. They can, depending on the internals of the transaction panel, they may be able to literally communicate with the victim and kind of push text into the injections that they're showing on screen. And they have some stuff that's just pre-made. If they're going to ask for a payment card number with all the details, they could just throw it on the screen and they had it pre-made, just some HTML code or something. And it's rather simple.
What's your thoughts on this in terms of attribution? Who's behind this?
Well, we believe this malware is made in Eastern Europe. We see it also from the the different connections it has to different malware, moving to Emotet and Handsetter. We see that the targets are all in the U.S., mostly U.S., a little bit in the U.K. targeting businesses. I think to me it's almost similar to the CACbot malware, which is a lot older, but the whole make of it and the way it's being handled or operated so far is very CACbot-like.
In terms of protecting themselves against this, what are your recommendations for people?
So people should, in general, these types of malware typically will come from an email. A lot of times it would be something that's an attachment and the whole enable macros routine. A lot of times this specific malware is, for businesses, it's going to come to a business email or to a business user on another email address, hoping that they're going to open it on their corporate machine. So really being careful with emails, verifying where they're coming from, checking the sender, and if it's apparently someone they know, maybe even check with that person if they're not expecting anything like that from them, any kind of file with information. I mean, these people can't really guess what the person's going to be expecting. So being extra careful. There are some cases where the malware might be delivered by an exploit kit, so it's going to be a drive-by download on some other website. So just not browsing to kind of untrusted websites and things like that would be good. Basic hygiene, basic internet browsing and internet use hygiene is one of the things that can really go a long way with these types of Trojans. And then once the person's already, let's say they're infected, they have no idea, they start a banking session. The banking session is not normal. Something about it really changed. I mean, their bank, or let's say their e-commerce account, never asked them to enter their payment card information on a screen, where they never initiated any kind of transaction or purchase or whatever, or they already have information saved somewhere there. It looks suspicious. Close the browser window and check with your provider. That's the best thing they can do in order to detect it themselves.
So is this a situation where your typical antivirus installation would not detect this?
Banking Trojans don't typically get detected by the antivirus. A lot of times antiviruses will detect the loader, the first step, maybe the emotet part, maybe the hand sitter part. They will probably see it a few days too late because the malware is always doing small mutations in order to flip around the signature, the file signature. So for antivirus, it's a little harder to actually identify them. Every time I test and I want to see, how many antiviruses will detect a certain malware, not too many of them. Typically, they'll see it as something generic. They're not really aware of how to stop it completely for banking Trojans.
In terms of persistence, so this survives restarts, things like that?
Yeah, definitely. Most banking Trojans, one of the first things they do during the deployment is to set up a persistence. There are common ways to do it, which is just establishing a run key and putting it in the registry and making sure that every reboot, this malware will get, rerun, which is what IcedID does. It doesn't do anything very special, but it works. And it's definitely one of those, basics for Trojans because they don't want to be eliminated if somebody reboots the computer. And for IcedID specifically, it actually only completes its deployment after a reboot. So it definitely has to come back up. And it might be doing that to require a reboot just to kind of evade some of the sandboxes that don't emulate rebooting processes.
So there's some interesting things with this in terms of network propagation. Can you take us through that element?
Yeah, so IcedID has its own network propagation module. So first, if it's dropped by Emotet that already has a network propagation, IcedID has, its own module that it can launch. And specifically, this one queries the lightweight directory access protocol, the LDAP, for users on the network. And then it will attempt to brute force weak password with the dictionary attack. And if it succeeds, it'll move to the next user and infect them as well. And maybe try to copy itself to different places in the network.
So in terms of someone trying to defend their network, would any of this network traffic look unusual?
It might if they're seeing that there is brute force on accounts and they could see in their controls that something is not right, because usually users are not going to make all that many attempts on their passwords, so it could get detected.
Our thanks to Limor Kessem from IBM's X-Force research team for joining us. You can read the full research report on the IcedID banking Trojan on IBM's X-Force research website. We got an update from Limor since we recorded this segment. The IcedID Trojan has gone quiet. Thanks to the Hewlett Foundation's Cyber Initiative for sponsoring our show. You can learn more about them at hewlett.org/cyber. The CyberWire Research Saturday is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technology. It's produced by Pratt Street Media. The coordinating producer is Jennifer Iben. Editor is John Petrick. Technical editor is Chris Russell. Executive editor is Peter Kilpie. And I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.